Have you ever heard of a woman who quietly but with great courage changed the future of her entire people? The journey of Esther is one of the most remarkable in the scriptures. She was an ordinary young Jewish woman, an orphan, who ended up reaching the throne of Persia and risked her own life to prevent the destruction of her nation. Even while living among impressive palaces, internal disputes and decisions that could cost lives, Esther stood out not for her appearance, but for her wisdom and her trust in God. She was not a warrior, she was not a religious leader. She was a simple woman who was placed in the right place at the right time. But how did someone so young and unprotected become queen of the greatest empire of that time? How did she find the strength to face a feared king and frustrate Haman's plan, which sought to eliminate all the Jews? And the most intriguing part, how did God guide everything so perfectly, even without his name appearing directly in the story? In this video, we will see how Esther's determination became an eternal example of faith, purpose, and surrender. This narrative shows that even when it seems that God is silent, he is still working behind the scenes, and he can use an ordinary person to bring about a great deliverance. Before we begin, make sure to leave your like and help this message reach more people. Esther was a young Jewish woman who lived in the great city of Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire. She lost her parents while she was still a child and was raised by her cousin Mordecai, a man faithful to God and highly respected among the Jews who remained in Persia after the captivity. Even far from their homeland, Mordecai always taught Esther to trust in the Lord and to keep alive the faith of Israel. Thus she grew up humble, wise, and known for her beauty and distinguished character. At that time, King Ahasuerus, also called Xerxes I, ruled a vast empire that extended from India to Ethiopia, with 127 provinces. The palace of Susa was an impressive place, full of luxury, celebrations, and displays of power. During a great banquet, the king, filled with pride and influenced by wine, ordered Queen Vashti to come before the guests to show her beauty. Vashti refused to obey, which was seen as a public act of disrespect. The queen's refusal caused great commotion among the nobles. They feared that other women in the empire would follow her example and stop obeying their husbands. Therefore, they advised the king to remove Vashti from the throne. The decree was issued, and she lost her position. Some time later, the king even felt her absence, but the decision could not be reversed. To fill the vacancy left in the palace, the advisors suggested gathering the most beautiful young women of the empire so that the king could choose a new queen. It was in this scenario that Esther's life changed radically. Among all the young women chosen to go to the palace was that simple Jewish girl raised by Mordecai. Before she left, her cousin asked her not to reveal to anyone that she was Jewish because the people of Israel were still looked down upon by foreigners. Esther, always obedient, followed his advice without questioning. As soon as she arrived at the harem, where the young women were prepared before meeting the king, Esther caught the attention of Haggai, the eunuch responsible for them all. He noticed something special in her, not only her beauty but her humble and calm behavior. For that reason, he treated Esther differently and offered her the best care, perfumes, and food. All the young women spent 1 full year in treatments before being presented to the king, but none gained as much favor as Esther. When her moment came, Esther did not make extravagant requests. She chose to follow only Haggai's instructions. Her naturalness and simplicity made her stand out even more. When she was brought before King Ahasuerus, something unexpected happened. The king liked her more than all the other women. He chose her, placed the crown on her head, and declared her queen of Persia. The coronation was celebrated with a great feast in honor of the new queen, and the king declared a holiday throughout the entire empire. For the Persians, that seemed like nothing more than part of the palace's political life. But for the people of God, it was the beginning of something much greater. The Lord was working in silence, placing Esther exactly where he wanted, in the heart of the empire and beside the most powerful man in the world. Even after becoming queen, Esther continued being the same humble person she had always been. The luxury of the palace did not change her way of living or her way of thinking. She continued following Mordecai's guidance and did not tell anyone that she was Jewish. Meanwhile, Mordecai remained close to the palace, always attentive to everything happening with the young woman he had raised as a daughter. When we look at the story, we realize that nothing happened by accident. The fall of Vashti, the choice of Esther, and her rise to the throne were not simple political events, but part of something much greater. Even though the book of Esther does not mention the name of God directly, it is clear that he was working behind the scenes. Every detail showed his direction and care, preparing the setting for a great deliverance that was still to come. Thus, that young orphan of simple origin ended up occupying the highest place in the most powerful empire of her time. Her appearance and intelligence brought her to the throne, but it would be her faith and courage that would turn her into one of the most important figures in the history of Israel. What seemed like a mere change in the political structure of Persia was in truth the beginning of a divine plan. God chose an unlikely person to protect and save his people. Esther did not yet know what she would face, but God had everything prepared. Through her, the Lord would show that his power does not depend on borders, empires, or circumstances. The life of this Jewish woman, marked by simplicity and faithfulness, would be used to change the destiny of an entire nation. After Esther took her place as queen, the empire remained strong under the command of King Ahasuerus. It was a period of great wealth and luxury, but also of much competition and pride within the palace. Among the king's advisors, there was a man named Haman, son of Hammedatha, known as an Agagite. The king promoted him to a very high position, making him the most influential man in the empire after Ahasuerus himself. Because of this, all the palace servants were required to bow before him as a sign of respect. But there was someone who did not do that, Mordecai, the Jew. Because he was faithful to the principles of his faith, he refused to kneel before any person, for he believed that such honor belonged only to God. Mordecai's attitude deeply irritated Haman. He could not accept that a simple man from a people considered inferior dared to disobey such a clear command. The king's officials even tried to convince Mordecai to change his attitude, but he always responded firmly that he was Jewish and that his faith did not allow such a gesture. When Haman discovered that Mordecai's refusal was connected to his identity as a Jew, his anger grew even stronger. To him, punishing only Mordecai was not enough. Wounded in his pride, he decided that he would destroy the entire Jewish people who lived throughout the provinces of the empire, men, women, and children. His intention went far beyond a simple punishment. It was driven by an ancient hatred. The Agagites, from whom Haman descended, were connected to the Amalekites, historical enemies of Israel since the days of King Saul. Now, that ancient resentment was rising again within the Persian palace, feeding Haman's desire for revenge. Haman devised a very carefully planned strategy. He went to King Ahasuerus and presented an idea that appeared to be concern for the security of the empire. He said that there was a people scattered throughout the provinces who lived differently from the others, followed their own laws, and did not obey the king's commands. With these exaggerated and distorted words, Haman suggested that this people could threaten the peace of the kingdom. Then he proposed that a decree be created ordering the complete elimination of that people, even offering a large amount of silver to strengthen the government's treasury. The king, not realizing that Haman was speaking about the Jews, gave him the royal ring, the symbol that granted authority to issue official decrees in the king's name. To choose the day of the attack, Haman cast lots, known as Pur, and the result pointed to the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. The decree was written quickly and sent to all the provinces of the empire, in all the languages, so that no one could claim ignorance. The message was terrifying. Kill, destroy, and exterminate all the Jews, young people, adults, elderly, women, and children, in a single day, and keep their possessions. The entire empire, which stretched from India to Ethiopia, was filled with shock and fear. While the king and Haman sat down to drink as if nothing were happening, the city of Susa was stunned by the cruel order. When Mordecai learned of the news, he was deeply grieved. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and covered himself with ashes as a sign of repentance and sorrow before God. He went to the gate of the palace, crying loudly, pleading for mercy. In all the provinces, the Jewish people reacted in the same way. They fasted, wept, and cried out to the Lord. Entire families knelt before God, begging for protection and deliverance. Mordecai sent messengers to inform Esther about what was happening. Living inside the palace, she had no idea of the tragedy that was approaching. When she received the news, she was greatly shaken. She tried to send new clothes to Mordecai, hoping he would remove the sackcloth and ashes, but he refused. Instead, he sent a message through Hathach, one of the eunuchs who served Esther, explaining the whole truth. Haman's cruel plan, the decree approved by the king, and the danger of death that all the Jews were facing. He also asked Esther to go to the king and plead for help. The queen became afraid. She knew exactly what that mission meant. At that time, no one could enter the king's presence without being summoned, not even the queen herself. The law stated that anyone who approached the throne without permission could be killed, unless the king extended his scepter, showing that the visit was accepted. Esther explained that it had been 30 days since the king had last called for her, which indicated that perhaps he was not as close to her at that moment. Mordecai, however, responded with firm and unforgettable words. He sent the famous message, "Do not think that because you are in the palace you will escape while all the other Jews perish. If you remain silent now, God will bring deliverance from another place, but you and your family will suffer the consequences. And who can say that you did not become queen exactly for such a time as this?" These words touched Esther deeply. She realized that her position was not a coincidence. God had placed her there for a reason, to be part of the deliverance of his people. The fear was still present, but faith began to grow within her. Esther understood that the value of her mission was not in the crown, but in the courage to act on behalf of life and justice. Certain of what she needed to do, Esther sent her answer to Mordecai with courage and faith. She asked all the Jews in Susa to unite in a fast for 3 days, without eating or drinking. She said that she and her servants would do the same. After those 3 days, she stated that she would go to the king, even knowing that this could cost her life. Her words were firm. "If I must die, I will die." This was a turning point. The young orphan who had once been just an ordinary girl was now showing herself to be a true leader, ready to sacrifice everything for her people. For 3 days and 3 nights, the Jews of Susa wept, fasted, and prayed together, seeking the mercy of God. Between despair and hope, they cried out for deliverance. Inside the palace, Esther also fasted with her servants. She knew she needed more than human courage. She needed the strength that comes from the Lord. It was a time of silence, reflection, and total surrender. The more time passed, the clearer it became that she could not remain silent. Her position as queen only had meaning if it served the purpose of God. On the 3rd day of the fast, Esther put on her royal garments and walked to the inner courtyard of the palace. Her heart pounded, for she knew that if the king did not extend the scepter, her life would end there. But the grace of God was upon her. When Ahasuerus saw her, he was pleased and extended the golden scepter. Esther approached and touched its tip. Then the king asked, "What do you desire, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even if it is half the kingdom, I will give it to you." With wisdom, Esther did not reveal her true objective at that moment. Instead, she answered respectfully, "If it pleases the king, come today with Haman to the banquet I have prepared." The king and Haman went to the first banquet prepared by Esther. During the meal, the king again asked what she wished to request. But once more, Esther delayed her answer and invited both men to a second banquet on the following day. She waited for the right moment to act, and her prudence would make all the difference in the story. Meanwhile, Haman left the banquet full of pride. He was radiant for being the only person invited by the queen besides the king. However, his joy ended quickly. As he passed through the palace gate, he saw Mordecai sitting and once again refusing to bow before him. This stirred up all of Haman's anger. When he arrived home, he told his wife and his friends about the banquet, but also complained about the presence of Mordecai, who spoiled his happiness. They then suggested that Haman build a very tall gallows, about 20 meters high, and asked the king to hang Mordecai on it the next morning. Haman liked the idea and ordered it to be built immediately. But God was already preparing everything. That very night the king could not sleep. He requested that the book of the Chronicles of the Kingdom be brought, where important events were recorded. As he listened to the reading, he was reminded that Mordecai had saved his life by revealing a conspiracy of 2 officers. The king then asked, "What reward was given to Mordecai for this?" And the servants replied, "None." At that moment, Haman arrived in the courtyard to ask permission to hang Mordecai. Before he could speak, the king asked, "What should be done for the man whom the king desires to honor?" Thinking that the king was speaking about him, Haman suggested that this man be dressed in royal garments, placed on one of the king's horses, and paraded through the streets as someone especially honored. To Haman's surprise, the king replied, "Do all of that for Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not fail to carry out anything you have suggested." Humiliated, Haman had to lead Mordecai through the streets, proclaiming his honor. When he returned home, he told everything to his wife and his friends. They then warned him, "If Mordecai is a Jew, you will not be able to defeat him." While Haman was still speaking with his family, messengers from the palace arrived in haste, summoning him to the second banquet prepared by Esther. During the meal, the king asked for the third time, "Queen Esther, what is your request? Speak, and I will grant it." This time Esther did not hold back. With firmness and emotion she said, "My king, I ask that my life and the life of my people be spared. We are about to be destroyed." The king was shocked and immediately asked, "Who would dare to do such a thing?" Esther then pointed to Haman and declared, "The enemy and aggressor is this wicked man, Haman." Ahasuerus was so enraged that he rose and went out to the garden. Haman, desperate, fell at Esther's feet, begging for his life. When the king returned and saw Haman on the couch where Esther was seated, he thought Haman was attacking her and became even more outraged. One of the servants informed the king that there was a gallows at Haman's house, built to hang Mordecai. Ahasuerus then ordered, "Hang Haman on it." Thus, Haman died on the very gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. After this, the king gave Esther everything that belonged to Haman, and Mordecai received a position of great authority in the palace. However, there was still one problem. The decree that permitted the death of the Jews could not be cancelled, for the laws of the Medes and the Persians were irrevocable. Esther then returned to the king and asked him to issue a new decree allowing the Jews to defend themselves on the day of the attack. The king agreed. Messengers were sent throughout all the provinces, announcing that the Jews now had permission to fight for their lives. When the appointed day arrived, the enemies tried to attack, but they were defeated. The Jewish people prevailed, and Mordecai became a respected figure throughout the empire. After the enemies were defeated and the decree of death no longer held power, fear was replaced with joy among the Jews. The entire Persian Empire witnessed an incredible transformation. Those who were about to be exterminated became respected and honored. In every city and province, the people gathered to celebrate. The days that were meant for sorrow and destruction became moments of celebration, gratitude, and praise to the God of Israel. It was in this atmosphere of victory that the Feast of Purim was born. The name comes from the word pur, which means lot, reminding the people of the casting of lots that Haman used to choose the day of the massacre. What was meant to be a moment of death became a permanent symbol of God's care and power. Mordecai, now holding great authority in the kingdom, sent letters to all the provinces establishing that Purim should be celebrated every year. On those dates, the Jews were to rejoice, exchange gifts, and share food with the poor, so that no one would be left out of the celebration. It was a way of remembering that God turned mourning into joy and a terrible threat into a great victory. To this day among the Jews, Purim is celebrated with rejoicing, the reading of the book of Esther, and remembrance of divine faithfulness. As for Esther, she remained in the palace, now recognized not only as queen, but as someone used by God to fulfill a special purpose. Her life had completely changed since the days when she was only a young orphan cared for by Mordecai. From an ordinary girl with no prominence, Esther became the most influential woman in the empire, not because of ambition, but because of courage and obedience. Her story crossed generations as an example of someone who used the position she had to save an entire people and not herself. Even after the great victory, Esther did not allow fame to change who she was. The Bible shows that she remained firm in her values and always close to Mordecai, who now held the highest position in the kingdom after King Ahasuerus. The two of them worked together for the protection and well-being of the Jews scattered throughout all the provinces. A people who once lived in fear became strengthened and united, clearly recognizing that God had acted on their behalf. The book of Esther ends without directly mentioning the name of God, and that is precisely what makes her story so special. The absence of the divine name does not indicate the absence of his action. In fact, every detail reveals God's care. He placed Esther in the palace at the right moment, touched the heart of the king, gave wisdom to Mordecai, and transformed a decree of death into a great deliverance. God revealed himself not only through visible miracles, but also through ordinary situations, decisions, and encounters that at first glance seemed like simple coincidences. The story of Esther teaches us that God is present even when everything seems silent. He acts behind the scenes, arranging every event according to his purpose. What appears to be chance to us is, in reality, divine direction. Esther had no idea of the challenges she would face when she became queen, but God already knew that he would use her to save his people. Her courage became an example of practical faith, the kind of faith that remains firm even without guarantees, trusting that the Lord truly rules over all things. The Jewish people never forgot what they experienced in that time. The Feast of Purim, celebrated every year, keeps alive the remembrance that the God of Israel is faithful and powerful. He changes sentences, lifts up the humble, and destroys the plans of those who act with pride. The life of Esther shows that an ordinary person, when acting with faith and wisdom, can be used by God to accomplish something extraordinary. The young orphan who arrived in Persia with no position or recognition ended up becoming the deliverer of a nation. Her story crossed generations as evidence that God chooses people of any background to fulfill his purposes. For this reason, the book ends by conveying hope. The people protected, justice restored, and God's care evident, even without his name appearing in the text. The journey of Esther reminds us that faith and courage, even in the face of danger, can transform reality. She put her life at risk, trusted in God, and prevailed. To this day, her example inspires those who face difficult moments, showing that God continues to act even when he seems silent. Now tell me in the comments, had you already heard the story of Esther in the Bible? Share this message with others, leave your like on the video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the upcoming content. May God bless you.